But we in Israel know a lot about terrorism. And all you have to do is take a walk through my neighborhood in Shiloh. You come to house after house after house. Let's take an imaginary walk, okay? You go across the street from my house, down the block and across the street, you come to a family by the name of Eldar. Okay, their 16-year-old son was killed in a terrorist attack. He was in his high school library studying the holy books. And there were a bunch of other children there, and terrorists came in, started shooting. He was killed. You go to the very next house on that street. There was a 17-year-old boy who was standing at a bus stop. Terrorists came, blew himself up. He was killed in that terrorist attack. Everyone at the bus stop, including that 17-year-old boy, was killed. The very next house, their 19-year-old granddaughter, she was also killed in a terrorist attack. She was a young American Israeli, actually. Okay, her father was American. And she was killed also in a terrorist attack at a bus stop. A few houses further down that street, you come to the Seaton family. And their 17-year-old son was killed when he was playing basketball at his high school. Terrorists came and infiltrated and started shooting at everyone, killing several boys, injuring many others, traumatizing many others for life. Then you go around the corner from there and you come to another family whose 5-month-old baby was killed when terrorists on the side of the road were throwing rocks at cars. One of those rocks, a rock about this big, hit that 5-month-old baby in the head, and he died several days later. There are many other terrorist attacks in the Shiloh township. I'm not going to tell you about all of them, but I just wanted you to hear these because just so you'll understand the intensity of the terrorism that we're facing. In fact, just almost 14 years ago, I was coming back from Jerusalem. Driving home in my car, I had my 3-year-old son with me in the baby seat. Suddenly the car was hit with a massive hail of bullets. Halfway home, bullets are flying. There were terrorists on the side of the road, on the right side of the road, with AK-47 assault rifles, we later found out. I saw 4 orange sparks in front of my eyes, and then a bullet crashed into my left leg, and blood started coming out all over the place. The car went completely dead when the bullets hit. I was just coasting down a hill, and I couldn't get the car to start. I turned the ignition, it wouldn't start. Then suddenly I remembered, I have my 3-year-old son sitting behind me in the baby seat. I turned around to him. My son's name is Rubin, or we call him Ruby. I said to him, "Ruby, are you okay?" His eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead. His mouth was wide open. He looked like he was trying to scream or to cry, but no sounds were coming out. I didn't see any blood on him, so I figured that he was just in shock. So I turned around quickly to start the car. I remembered there's usually an ambulance stationed at the next community up the road, which is called Ofra. And I quickly tried to start the car. I turned the ignition. The car was dead. It wasn't starting. I turned it again and again. I shifted gears, parked, neutral, trying whatever I could to get the car to start. And it wasn't starting. It was dead. The terrorists are still shooting. Then suddenly the car started, and it started like with a major roar, like it had never had a problem starting before. I hit the gas. I drove as fast as I could to get up to the next community up the road where I hoped I could get an ambulance. I was driving about 110 miles an hour. It was 170 kilometers an hour. 170 kilometers an hour. I'm not sure what that is. But 170 kilometers an hour. It was 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 170 kilo But I got up to the next community. I started screaming and shouting for an ambulance. Nobody seemed to hear me. The guard at the gate, by the way, in Samaria, we have metal gates in front of, at the entrance to every community to keep out car bombers. So the guard at the gate didn't seem to hear me. And a young woman was on the side of the road. She started jumping up and down, screaming, "Ambulance, ambulance, don't you hear?" At that point, everyone who was within sound reach came running up to the car. Some teenagers from the bus stop ran up to see what was going on. The gas station attendant from across the street ran up to the car. He ripped off my shirt. He wrapped up my left leg to stop the blood flow. He said, "I'm also a paramedic. I know what I'm doing. Don't worry." And he handed me his cell phone. And he said, "Here, call your wife." I couldn't dial. My hand was shaking too much. He said, maybe because it was a cold night, maybe from loss of blood, I don't know. He dialed it for me. And with one hand, he's holding my leg tight to stop the blood flow. With the other hand, he's dialing the phone somehow. I told my wife I've been shot in the leg. Hopefully an ambulance will soon be coming to take me to the hospital, and Ruby is okay. Well, about 30 seconds later, an ambulance pulls up, and two paramedics leap out of the ambulance. One of them runs up to the car and starts unbuckling my son from the baby seat. And I said, no, please leave him alone. He's just in shock. He needs to be with his Abba. He needs to be with his dad. And he said, "No, sir, I have to take him out." He pulls him out of the car. He cradles him in his arms. He starts running at break speed to the ambulance, shouting, "He's also been shot. He's been shot in the head." A bullet had gone into his head, we later found out, where the skull meets with the neck, causing a skull fracture and internal bleeding in the cerebellum. Well, they quickly wrapped his head with bandages, put an oxygen mask on his face, and whisked both of us on stretchers into the ambulance and took us to the hospital on the other side of Jerusalem. When we got there, they put us in two separate emergency rooms. He needed to be in the children's wing, which was on the other side of the hospital, and they get to work on us. After about 20 minutes, the head surgeon came up to me and he says, David, I just want you to know we're going to have to operate on both of you within the half an hour. It'll be the first of possibly multiple operations, but I just wanted you to be aware of that, and there's someone else here who wants to speak to you. So another man walks up to me who I had never seen before. He says, "I'm the public relations director for this hospital. I just want you to know that you are the 1,000th victim of terrorism to be hospitalized at this hospital in the past year and a half." Well, I wasn't quite sure why he was telling me this, giving me this dubious honor. He said, "I'm telling you this because the media is massed outside this emergency room. They want to interview the 1,000th victim of terrorism and photograph you and your son. And I will keep them away. I will protect your privacy because that's my job." And I thought for a moment, and I thought of all the terror victims who I already knew or had known. I had a friend, a very good friend from Brooklyn, who had been killed in a terrorist attack the year before. There were already terror victims in Shiloh who we knew. And I said, you know what? And I'll tell you something else. We used to drive to work during that period. People would drive to work wearing bulletproof vests and helmets in their private cars. It was that insane. Every day there was another terrorist attack. Anyhow, I told this guy, "You bring them in here. I have what to say to them." And I've been telling this story ever since. And I tell this story not just because of our personal trauma, because Lord knows there are many others, many other families, hundreds of families that have suffered far worse than us. I tell this story also not because I have a political message to deliver, even though obviously not shy about my opinions. I tell this story because it's a story of miracles. We have an obligation to publicize a miracle. I was shot in my left leg, even though the terrorists were shooting from the right side, which enabled me to drive my automatic car to get to that ambulance. The bullet that went into my son's head through his neck missed his brain stem by 1 millimeter. Now these are the kinds of miracles that kind of take a spiritually trained eye to see. Now, your average atheist will look at that and say, try and rationalize it away. He'll say, well, the bullet missed your right leg because you lifted your right leg up in the air. Or yeah, come on, miracles. The bullet missed your son's brainstem because he must have been leaning forward. But then there are certain miracles that just stare you in the face that can't be denied. We call them in Hebrew, nisim niglim, revealed miracles. Like that fire on the mountain on Mount Sinai when the whole nation of Israel watched Moses receiving the 10 Commandments. Or like the splitting of the Red Sea as the children of Israel passed. In our times also, on my 5th day in the hospital, I'm laying there in my hospital bed. My leg is attached to some device that was supposed to prepare it for plastic surgery that was soon to come. And my son was in the intensive care unit in the children's wing of the hospital. He was sleeping some 21 hours of the day because of the internal bleeding in the cerebellum. When he was awake, he could hardly lift himself up in his bed. He had almost total memory loss. He didn't remember his sisters who came to the hospital to visit him. He didn't remember his little 3-year-old friends who had made pictures and brought them to the hospital with their names written on it by the nursery school teacher. And on that 5th day in the hospital, I get a call from the car mechanic, a nice fella named Erez from Jerusalem. He says, David, I just want you to know we have the car. We've started ordering parts. There are 49 bullet holes in the car. It's going to be very difficult to fix, but we're certainly going to try. So don't worry. I said, don't worry? I mean, I hadn't even thought about the car. And he said, I'm just calling you because I have to ask you a question. And then there was silence on the other end of the phone for a few seconds. And then I hear a faint voice that almost didn't sound like him asking me, why can't we start that car? And a chill went down my back because I know that the car went dead when the bullets hit. And I know that I drove 110 miles an hour to get it to start after it was refusing to start. And I know that I got to that ambulance. And now he's telling me that at that point, the car had to be towed because it was dead. They had to tow it to Bethel. It's probably one, Pennsylvania. And then from there they had to have it towed to Jerusalem, okay, because the police had to file their report in Bethel. And now he has it in Jerusalem, and he's telling me they don't know why they can't start the car. Now, I have a personal confession to make. I've been a believer in the God of Israel for over 30 years, but up until that very day, I still had some of that old New York City skepticism when it came to personal miracle stories. But I'm not a skeptic any longer. We were just lifted up on God's wings to get us to that ambulance. And I knew after that day that I was a changed person. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what... I knew that the Almighty had planted a mission in me. I didn't know what it was. I only discovered that about 3 weeks later when my son came home from the hospital. And he was screaming in the middle of the night. This happened a couple of nights, and I hobbled over to him with my walker. At that point, I had graduated from a wheelchair to a walker, and he screamed even louder. And I realized that there is psychological trauma from terrorism also. You know, with all the terrorist attacks in Israel, what happens? There's a terrorist attack, and then it's reported on the news like a sports event. 2 killed, 5 wounded. 1 killed, 15 wounded. And everyone talks about the wounds, only the physical wounds, not the emotional wounds. But here we were realizing on the spot that there are emotional wounds. And about 2 weeks later, I'm at home. I was still home on disability, and he was home with me. And he's sitting there in the living room in his pajamas. He still had a bandage on the back of his neck. And he's sitting in this toy car. We had a toy car that's about the size of this table here. And he's sitting inside the car. And then I hear him talking. And I looked over to him, and then he picked up a doll that was inside the car. And he showed it to me, and he said, "This is the Abba. This is the father. He has a hole in his leg." And then he picked up another doll, and he said, "This is the little boy. He was shot in the head or the neck." And at that moment, my eyes filled with tears, because I understood that there is a way to heal trauma with children. Children aren't like adults. Adults can go into a therapist and talk it out. And it may not be easy, but adults can overcome trauma verbally. Children need intermediaries. And what eventually happened is that I established the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund with the purpose of healing trauma of terrorism in children, and yes, rebuilding the biblical heartland of Israel through the children. So we established